I Dwell in Possibility by Emily Dickinson is a poem that strikes me as more and more sad every time that I read it. It's a poem that once seemed hopeful and nearly jubilant, but when you get under the surface level of this poem, it is almost written with the sheen of a live, laugh, love bedstand. But underneath that is the stark reality of what is going on with and for our speaker. But I started this series with the intent of spicing it up a little bit with talk of nihilism and talk of hauntology. Two things that interest me to a great deal, and I wanted to combine them with Emily Dickinson. This may be when I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't prepared for the when I put together this list of poems, I included I Dwell in Possibility because it's an essential Emily Dickinson poem. I was not prepared for it to be so starkly useful in the discussion and explication and application of hauntology. So that is something that I came to in this video, and hopefully it is there for you as well. This video is part of 3 separate playlists here on the channel. Number 1 being obviously the Echoes of Emily playlist, but number 2 being a playlist of Emily Dickinson poetry discussions, and third, the general playlist for poetry discussions. If you like or appreciate the work that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing that I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. So consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more literature in the future. I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors, of chambers as the cedars, impregnable of eye, and for an everlasting roof the gambrels of the sky. Of visitors the fairest, for occupation this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise. Now, this could seem a very lovey-dovey, airy-dairy type of poem, but I want to explain to you why it's not. I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors. I dwell in possibility. I dwell in those things that never have been. I dwell in the imagination. I dwell in all of those things that I hope to do. A fairer house than prose. We are here in a poem. Our speaker is telling us that she does not dwell in her poetry, but in possibility. Okay, saying that there is a difference between what is possible and what is prose. I can dig it. More numerous of windows, the possibilities are more numerous than windows. Superior for doors, of chambers as the cedar. Okay, so what we're saying here is that these possibilities, I can see them everywhere, and I can even draw distinctions between them. All right, I'm still with you. I'm still with you a little bit. This is throwing me off. Dwelling in possibility as opposed to action. Impregnable of sky, and for an everlasting roof the gambrels of the sky. So this is in the same vein as the brain is wider than the sky, right? Saying basically that the feeling of imagination, the feeling of brainstorming, the feeling of creation takes the top off our head and expands our consciousness into the very sky, into the everlong of space, of visitors to possibility, the fairest. Okay, so I can see that. You're saying that other people who are living in possibility are people who are not going to be people that judge you, I think, is sort of what's getting at there. For occupation, this: the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise. Well, that doesn't mean anything, does it? This is a speaker being lost in thought. This is a speaker being lost in possibility. You know, the Stoics say that we don't suffer from the world. All of the nastiness that happens here, all of the people who will lie, cheat, and steal from you, those things don't make us suffer. What makes us suffer is our interpretation thereof. When someone wrongs us, for example, we could just accept it and leave that person behind. We could just accept it and decide, lesson learned. But we don't do that. It is in this possibility that we suffer. So, I think that this poem is in part a misconception of the real world. Now, I'm not saying that Emily Dickinson wrote this mistakenly. Not at all. Never would I deign to imply such a thing. What I'm saying is that I think the speaker's philosophy here is out of touch. This is dangerous. It is dangerous to live the livelong day in possibility as opposed to the real world. If you have been with me on this channel for any period of time, there are times you will have noticed where I disappear. During those times, this channel is not far from my imagination. What happens is that I get paralysis by analysis. I start thinking of all of the things that I should do and quit doing altogether. I dwell in possibility at those times. Dwelling in possibility, a fairer house than making videos. Dwelling in possibility, a fairer house than criticism. Dwelling in possibility, a fairer house than execution. I regret those times. I regret the times that I disappear because, and I'm not saying these things to self-serve on this video. I think that all of the things I'm saying right now are immediately graftable onto your own life, right? There are times where you have gone through paralysis by analysis for sure. And at the end of it, maybe it's even just putting off doing your homework, right? And then by the time you get to the end of that paper that you had to write, you don't think the paper's half bad, and it wasn't so painful to write. That's living in possibility. Or living, so the procrastination is living in possibility, not prose. You can substitute out whatever your endeavor is for the place of prose there. Now, I want to get to a nihilistic interpretation of this poem, and kind of ironically, for a poem that is speaking so glowingly about not doing anything, pardon me, this poem may have a fairly strong nihilistic interpretation. If we take this poem and we read it through one more time, I dwell in possibility of fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors, of chambers as the cedars, impregnable of sky, and for an everlasting roof, the gambrels of the sky, of visitors the fairest, for occupation this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise. All of this possibility. This is possibility of our speaker's creation. Prose, this seems to be the preferred action of our speaker. Where do you see anything that could be described as conventional or orthodox? We do not have those things here because our speaker is creating their own values, morals, beliefs, and systems, living outside of the conservative, living outside of those things that might be considered safe, living outside of those things which have been erected by previous generations. Living in possibility is definitionally living in the future as opposed to the past. Traditionally, if I can use that word unironically here, traditionally, the conservative is concerned with holding on to some idea of the past and valuing that idea of the past. The nihilist says all of these things from the past, we have to break them down. Now, it might be that we just go ahead and rebuild the same edifice. It might be that we go ahead and rebuild every bit of society as had it been, but we have to go through the exercise. And this poem is doing just that. From a hauntological perspective, I dwell in possibility. Is the past possible? No, the past happened. Is the present possible? No, the present is happening. It is the future that is possible, meaning that our speaker here is spectral in a sense, but as opposed to being in the present and seeing specters of the past, the interesting thing from a hauntological standpoint from this poem, something that, not really of any value in the poem itself, but as a thought exercise, may be fruitful. This could be the genesis of a future specter, a future haunting. Hauntology is concerned with one of the key phrases from, I think it's Mark Fisher from Hauntology, the future has been canceled. And that's why we keep repeating all of the cultural steadfasts, if you will, of the past. Instead of coming up with new, interesting, fashionable pants, well, bell bottoms are coming back. Instead of making great new superheroes, not only are we using the other ones, the older ones, we're just rewashing Batman for the 9th time. Not only are we rewashing Batman movies, rewashing them, and putting them on the line to watch, Batman is recycled from comic books, right? So and this is actually maybe the most hauntological poem that we have read thus far from Emily Dickinson, but in a very interesting way, because what hauntology is concerned with is those images of the past haunting today. But those images of the past which are most haunting are images from the past of what the future might have been. When you look at drawings, renderings from the 50s of what the year 2000 will look like, Well, here we are 20 years after that, almost 25 years almost after that. Here we are, half as far from 2020 as 2020 was from 1950. 1950 to 2000 was 50 years. 2020 to 2024, 25-ish years. We are half the distance again away from that point. But those images of the future as imagined by people from the 50s haunt us because our culture has not progressed. Here we have our speaker living, dwelling in possibility, dwelling in those ideas of what the future might be. This is the invocation of those hauntings of possible futures to the future. So this is a very interesting poem in a hauntological standpoint, because this is sort of the genesis. This poem could be read very much as the genesis of whence those ideas haunt. I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors, of chambers as the cedars, impregnable of eye, and for an everlasting roof the gambrels of the sky. Of visitors the fairest, for occupation this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise.